I think my only qualification for chairing this meeting is that I did a degree in languages. Admittedly, it was German, not English, but I was going to teach English as a foreign language, but my life took on a slightly different turn. For those of you who don't know me, I present LBC's Drive Time show Monday to Friday, and I run Bite Back Publishing. I think this whole concept of sort of how English is going to do over the next few years is quite interesting, particularly after Jean-Claude Juncker's comments last week when I haven't got his exact quote here, but he seemed to indicate that he thought English was a dying language, which was an interesting perspective, I suppose, as usual from Mr. Juncker. I think quite the opposite. I'm going to be really interested to hear what our panel have to say about sort of how English is going to develop and maybe how this country after Brexit can sort of promote English in a way that maybe we haven't done up until now. Now, Lucy Powell is going to be joining us, but a little bit later, as is, I think, traditional at Labour Party conferences. I did a fringe meeting yesterday where Shukra Moona turned up an hour late, but we were very grateful to him for doing so anyway. Right, we're going to start with Sarah Cooper. Sarah is the Chief Executive of English UK, which is the National Association of Accredited English Language Centres in the UK. The association's mission is to lead the UK English language training industry to success through innovation and technology. And its members, they've got 450 members from small independent language schools to large university language centres. Sarah.
Thank you very much, Ian. Right, I thought I'd begin by painting a picture of the industry and giving you a flavour of the type of students that are within it. It might surprise you to hear that last year nearly 500,000 people came to the UK to study English. Over half of them were under 18. But let me give you a few examples. We might have had an Italian teenager who's come over with her school for a 2-week stay, perhaps in the summer, perhaps during term time as a group with her school. She's joined by a Chinese teenager who's been sent over by his parents to learn English, again for an intensive summer camp probably. They've sent him for the total cultural immersion. He's come because he hopes he can go and see Manchester United, probably.
Or West Ham.
Or West Ham, possibly. Let's go, I won't go any further with the football one because I'll get completely lost.
You don't need to.
No, okay. But they do come for this total immersion. They come and stay with British families in something called a homestay programme. Many of those youngsters come back, particularly the long-haul students, because their parents are shopping around the globe and have been doing so since they were nursery school age for the best country in which to send them to university. So they're shopping around between the UK, the US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. So that summer camp, that 2-week stay, is potentially the beginning of a major investment in UK education. So that gives you an idea of some of the students. At the other end of the spectrum, the adults, increasingly they'll be coming for very specialist employment-related English language training, again for quite a short stay, sometimes a week, sometimes just 4 weeks. So the average length of stay overall is only about 5 weeks for these students. So it could be lawyers, it could be the HR director of a cosmetic company from somewhere in Europe coming to practice English and soft skills for a week. At a specialist centre. Lawyers, airline pilots. English, of course, is the language of the air. All of these people, whether they're youngsters, whether they're adults, they come to England, to the UK, they come to Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales as well, I hasten to add. We've got members all over the UK, to build their confidence, to build careers and to build connections. And those connections can last a lifetime. And it's a business I feel passionately we need to protect and grow. Now, last year, 242,000 students came from the European Union of all ages for all sorts of reasons. They're the ones I'm most concerned about because the last thing I want to see is some burdensome visa regime imposed upon those students to discourage them from coming to the UK, which of course is the heart and the home of the language. We've got a history of years, decades, centuries of mutual cultural exchange with the rest of Europe. Just as those 242,000 students come here, we're sending people to Europe, and long may that continue. English is the most widely spoken language in the world. A recent British Council report estimated that by the year 2020, there will be 2 billion speakers of the English language. In many nations, competency in English is a measure of their employability, and there have been reports doing direct correlations. Another one of those measures is a period studying overseas. Worth noting. In the Middle East and North Africa regions, English is seen, not surprisingly, as the language of intercultural communication. And of course, English is the language of international business. So many of those students I was talking about, they're coming here to learn English, not to be speaking English with English people, but to be speaking English with Koreans, with Nigerians, with Indonesians, and so on. So it's, again, a business we need to protect and grow because of the huge soft power it creates. I'd like to conclude by looking at the economic impact of the English language teaching industry in this country. English UK commissioned a report a couple of years ago which showed that English language teaching in the UK generated £1.2 billion for UK GDP. It employs 26,000 people. And that revenue is coming into small businesses in the main, although we have some very large members. In fact, EF, Chris is representing, is a member of English UK. Many of our schools and centres are small businesses, and the other direction for that revenue is families. Families in Brighton, in Eastbourne, in Bournemouth, in Cambridge, in Oxford, etc., who are relying on maybe £5,000 or £6,000 a year, but it's essential income for them that they're getting from students. Now, we've been losing market share over the last few years. There has been a decline recently in English language teaching in the UK. I'm happy to say we think that's now recovering, but we've been losing market share in ELT as well as international education to Australia, to Canada, to the US, and New Zealand. And I was quite surprised to read a report last week which showed that Spanish visitors to Australia to learn English has gone up 23%, now from a very small base. But Spanish people are now not coming to the UK to learn English, they're going to Australia, and that's something we clearly have to do something about. So I'm aware, as everybody will be, that English as a medium of instruction is growing a lot all over Europe, we know about in universities, but in other parts of the world as well. Transnational education is growing, and I welcome that and embrace the opportunity that gives for some of my providers. But I still want to protect and grow the business coming into the UK, because that's where my members are and that's where their livelihood is based. English is at the heart of all of international education. We have about just over 300,000 students coming to study here in university, and they all need English. Some of them are coming to my centres first, some of them are learning it in their own country. Many of them are having it embedded in their courses in this country. So English is at the heart, whether it's a 2-week summer camp that leads to a long-term university investment 6-7 years down the line, or whether it's for the Italian teenager, or whether it's for the finance director of a cosmetics company. All of those people need English, and we want them to be learning it in the UK. And I believe that with a government cross-department coordinated strategy, we can build that industry.
Interesting what you said about school exchanges. In 1977, I think it was, I went on my first school exchange trip to Germany. Before that, I'd been the worst in class at learning German.
Yeah.
When I came back, we did our end of year exams, and I came top. And the teacher thought I'd cheated. But that sparked my interest in German. My old school now doesn't do exchanges because they can't do criminal records checks on the parents. How is that affecting the numbers of kids that come to this country or indeed go to other European countries?
I don't have data on people going to other European countries, but the regulations are very strict for under 18s coming here. And we will have DBS checks. We have the group leaders bringing them will have responsibility for the students, but we are very thorough in our DBS checks of everybody involved with the children here. And that's part of the accreditation scheme that we run in partnership with the British Council.
So parents now have to be...
Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely, yes, and adults in the household.
But presumably some European countries don't have those schemes.
No, and other nations sending students here don't understand the concept of safeguarding. So there's a lot of work we do with educating agents, because 75% of students coming to the UK come through an agent. And so we run training programs, some of our own, some with the British Council, to explain the concept of safeguarding and to reassure them about the safety of their children while they're here. And that's why, I talk very passionately about the accredited sector, because unfortunately there are unaccredited providers in the country who won't necessarily go through that because they're not inspected. I
just think of the 15-year-old equivalent of me now,
yes,
who might not have the opportunity that I had because of that.
Yeah.
Right, let's move on. Christopher McCormick directs the development of Education First language testing and training programs. He oversees the instructional design of EF's educational media, including software, textbooks, video and audio. Christopher.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Thanks for joining. And thank you to the chair and also to Policy Exchange for hosting this event. It was interesting to hear you talk about the spark that you experienced going abroad as a young person. We see this every day in our classrooms. We have, in any one of our schools here in the UK, we may have 100 nationalities or more represented. And to see students interacting across languages, nationalities, cultures, that spark happens every single day. And these young people go home changed. Learning a language is a life-changing experience. And it's beyond just learning the language. We know from research that learning a language changes you for the better. It has cognitive benefits, academic benefits, cultural awareness benefits, and it helps with long-term intelligence even. And it helps young people be able to see themselves in a different light and to see opportunity. Language learning is good for you, and we want to advocate for the benefits of language learning, not only English, but all languages. Here in the UK, we're very proud to have been part of the English language training industry for over 50 years. Our first courses overseas were run here in the UK in Brighton. We've been operating since 1965. We have 9 permanent centres around the UK, primarily located in seaside communities, where we have hundreds of thousands of students who have come to learn English in the UK just over the last few years alone. We work with local communities, local businesses to provide opportunities to enrich the experience of students studying here, and we also work with many families who host our students and welcome them. We're very honored to be part of developing communities in such a way. Welcome.
Sorry.
No, come on in. Hello. It's important to put some perspective around why people come and what they're actually looking for when they're learning a foreign language. As Sarah mentioned, we have a wide variety of course types for juniors as well as up to executives. People are coming here because they need English for some purpose in their life and really trying to understand from that student's perspective how English or how language is going to change their opportunities. Helps us, it informs what we design and develop and deliver in our schools. These students return home positive about the UK, whether it's a short course experience or something far more intensive, or through university, or even as part of their career development. And this is a way to engage people overseas. There's a lot of urgency behind all of this. As Sarah mentioned, it's estimated 2 billion people use the English language by 2020 or so. Only 25% of them are native speakers or could be considered native speakers. So 75% of the world using English doesn't have it as a native language. But English is a basic skill for career success and prosperity today. We see this around the world. We've been researching the English language proficiency of the adult population across the world for the past 10 years using free English tests online. We've had over 10 million results, and through that research we produce an annual ranking of countries by their average level of English proficiency. And we can see who's in the top countries in Western Europe, but by far the countries with which we wish to engage, especially in the context of Brexit, are far lower, medium to low proficiency, or very low proficiency countries. It's in our interest to promote the importance of using English for international trade and cooperation and professional opportunity. But it's also in their interest to try to see the UK as the most attractive destination, whether as a place to go to study or as a source for the standards. I think we also should be very mindful of the fact that English language certification and standards can be generated here in the UK, whether it's through different types of exams, or it's the teacher training and the methodology that can be projected from here. There are ways to have an impact with the English language beyond training directly in the country. We know that people need the English language. We know that we need to be able to take advantage of the penetration that English already has in the workforce, because it is the de facto language of business today. As Sarah mentioned, English is a very important industry, English language training here in the United Kingdom. A third of students who go abroad to study language come here. But those numbers are changing, and the patterns change all the time. There can be no complacency. We are losing market share in the UK to other countries. We also see changing demographics. The duration of course is getting shorter. But these patterns change, and there can be different world events that influence the decisions. It can be fluctuations in currency that actually right now we're experiencing a bump in the UK because the pound has dropped so much. So people who otherwise would have gone somewhere else are coming here. So these things we have to pay attention to all the time. But it's the impact on the local communities where this is really felt. In our 9 centres around the UK, we estimate that we make a contribution of over £30 million a year through salaries, through premises and activities, accommodation. And on top, our students, EF students who are coming, are contributing an additional £21 million just in the last year. So we need to also think about what difference that will make if people choose to go somewhere else. What will that happen in those local communities where these families are welcoming these students around the world? So we would like to see a climate that's very conducive to welcoming international students to the UK, to promoting English language training here in the UK as the right place to go. Take advantage of these, the competitive benefits or the selling points we have in the UK as the origin of the language, the unique culture, the way that people will have a relationship for a lifetime with this place if they come here for that life-changing experience. So we welcome the opportunity to be part of the Policy Exchange event to really help to raise awareness of the importance of English language training, not only for students, but also for the long-term engagement that the UK can have around the world, and also for those local communities. We would just want to make sure that there are no deterrents to coming to the UK to study, that it's a welcoming environment for people to be here, and we also want to make sure that it's a destination of choice well into the future. Thank you.
Does market share matter as much as actual numbers? I mean, are the numbers growing?
The numbers are, it depends on the sector, but the market share absolutely does matter as well as the numbers, because numbers are of head count do not necessarily mean the same contribution to the economy, because we count in our field, we count in weeks, how many weeks people come and stay. And what we see is to destinations such as the United States, the average duration of stay is far longer. Whereas people are coming, they may be going for a longer-term academic focus program, maybe bound towards university entrance. It's farther to travel, so you might stay longer. And also we find that the market here is getting younger. So younger and younger students are coming to the UK, and they stay for shorter amounts of time. So you want to work both on your market share and your awareness of the UK as a destination and the headcounts.
Okay. John Blake joined Policy Exchange as Head of Education and Social Reform in April this year. He previously worked for the Harris Federation and he founded and co-edited Labour Teachers from 2011 to 2014 and is currently a member of the Advisory Council of the Parents and Teachers for Excellent campaign. John.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
And thank you everyone for coming this morning. I think why I find this issue so interesting is that it's as Sarah and Chris have both eloquently argued, it's about the role of English language and the English language itself in the international market, but I also think it's an excellent example of English educational practice in the international context altogether. And I think for various reasons, many of which I support, English education in this country has been very focused internally on its own particular issues to do with its own qualifications, its own curriculum, and its own teacher training process in the past few years, and that was designed to strengthen the offer for students in this country. But I think often that has drawn our attention away from the extent to which English education is world leading and deeply enmeshed in the kind of the international market and the international world. Our qualifications are sold abroad, and of course our language is absolutely central. So I think having this conversation about both what we can do as an exporter of the English language, but also what that tells us about the way English education faces the world, I think is really important. I think in those terms, I think there's some interesting things. I'm particularly interested in what Sarah said about the fact that Spanish nationals are seek their English education in Australia now, even whilst we remain in the European Union. I think that suggests that there are things that people have often suggested that leaving the EU will have potentially calamitous consequences for our education arena, but at the moment we're not taking full advantage of that. For example, we can't fill our modern foreign language teaching positions here in this country already, even whilst we are able to access that market. So there's clearly a lot we need to learn about making that international exchange work appropriately. And I think also we need to be reminded that there is a vast world beyond Europe in which our qualifications and our curriculum are valued, are sold, and are exchanged. One area where I think needs to be particular focus in the future years is that at the moment English education draws very strongly on some of the places that Sarah talked about. We get our teachers from Australia or from Canada or from New Zealand, but as the amount of international education grows and international schools abroad grow, they will be fishing in the same pool for teachers. So we need to ensure that we are providing a right number of English language speaking educated teachers in all disciplines, in all subjects. And I think Chris's point about the fact that this is not just about English language, it goes beyond that into all the ways in which English language can be used to interact with the educational offer of the country is massively important. And I think that all needs a great deal of attention as we approach the Brexit moment. So I think I'm very interested in the advance of this particular set of conversations. Thank you.
Okay. Lucy, welcome.
Hello.
Lucy Powell is the Labour and Cooperative MP for Manchester Central. She was Shadow Education Minister from October 2013 to November 2014. And then in September 2015, she was appointed Shadow Secretary of State for Education. But as we know, she returned to the backbenches in June 2016. But she's a member of the Education Select Committee. Lucy.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And thanks for inviting me to this event. I mean, I have to say, when I was first invited to the event, I thought, well, what would I say about that, really? And I think, in a way, that's why I wanted to come to the event, because I thought about it for a moment and thought, well, this is a critical issue, isn't it? How we export and use the English language, which is the world's language, and yet it gets very, very little policy attention. And obviously, in the context of Brexit in particular, it is a key issue. So we know that English is the world's language, really. 1 in 4 estimates say that 1 in 4 people around the world speak or use English regularly, and it's the language of computers, it's the language of the internet, it is the international language of the world, and it's not something that we consciously, I don't think, as a country or as policymakers, really give enough emphasis to when we're thinking about what our global advantage is. I mean, I sort of have a slight self-interest in this as well, in that there's a local language school in Manchester which we use to get au pairs through. So we've had about 7 au pairs over the last few years come through. And what always strikes me from all across Europe is these ambitious young people who come to Manchester for a few months to further their English and live with us while they're here. It's absolutely fundamental to their future careers in Spain or Germany or France or wherever to have really good English, and they can't sort of progress for many of them in a whole range of areas without having English there. So I don't really know what the answer is. I think it's a huge opportunity for us to be the home of the world's language, but obviously Brexit poses great challenges to that, because I certainly know from my own perspective that many of the students that come and live with us will struggle to do so after Brexit unless there's some arrangement made there.
Why?
Well, potentially because of changes to the immigration system. I mean, let's hope that that's not the case, but to come to England for 6 months, you know, as they do it currently, I think would be a prohibitive issue potentially, because I think the government are talking about 3-month visas, aren't they? So I don't think 3 months is long enough to really come and study a language. And I think from what you were saying before, that length of stay is a sort of critical component in your competitiveness in this area. So I think that this needs to be significantly raised higher up on the agenda. And I think looking at some of the evidence that you've all presented about the economic impact that it has for this country in terms of importing and exporting education in English. But I think beyond that, really, about how we can make sure that companies from around the world see coming to the UK because of the language, as amongst other things, as a key part in that. For English teachers as well, we cannot have this sort of conversation without talking about the current situation for teacher recruitment, retention in this country. I think figures from 2015 showed that more teachers left to work abroad, more British trained teachers moved abroad than started PGCEs. So we've got a massive recruitment crisis in this country. Lots of teachers are leaving, which is a good thing for all the reasons you were saying about exporting our teaching and our practice and our language. But unless we're developing more and more homegrown teachers consciously, then this is going to be a big problem for the country as well. So I think we should be encouraging teachers to go abroad, but then we've got to make sure that we backfill that properly as well. So I haven't got a huge amount to sort of offer to this debate at this stage, but I was very interested to come along, because I think this is something that, at a education select committee sort of level and at a policy level really does require further interrogation about what are effective policies, what could be effective policies in this area. But I think the starting point has got to be that government and policymakers recognise that this is a key issue, and it's not one that I've heard much discussion about to date. So thank you for having me.
It's going off the subject slightly, but do you worry about the number of English students under the age of 18 who are actually taking foreign languages nowadays? Because the feeling seems to be, well, everyone else speaks English, so why should we bother? And I know that different languages, I mean, when I was at school, it's just French and German, basically. You were quite lucky if you had another opportunity, whereas now there are lots of different languages, but only very sporadically in certain schools. Do you think there needs to be a bigger initiative to encourage more language learning in schools?
Well, there is a big initiative at the moment, and I kind of think it's sort of almost going the other way. Nick Gibb, who's the schools minister, who's sort of one of my nemesis really, who's kind of in the mould of Michael Gove, and it comes from that sort of Gove era. They're obsessed. They were obsessed that you could only be truly academic if you did a modern foreign language to GCSE, and so now really, it's a requirement that everybody do a modern foreign language to GCSE, and in fact schools are being penalised if any less than 90% of their students don't do a modern foreign language.
That's a bad idea?
Well, I tell you why. I mean, look, I think what happens with policies, you tend to overcorrect the other way. So, maybe there was a move away from modern foreign languages, and now we're having such a move back. I just don't think it suits everybody. That's the thing. I mean, I've got a 13-year-old boy myself who's, brilliant at maths and science. He absolutely hates French. I mean, it's like plucking teeth. And he's got loads of support at home. We've got French au pair. My husband's really good at French. So, but for a kid who absolutely resents doing it and hates doing it and has got no capacity to get any support at home, to shoehorn them into that, and then what that means is in timetabling terms they can't do art, or they can't do drama, or they can't do music or sport or something else. So I think we've slightly overcorrected the other way, if I can impart my opinion on you.
Right, anybody got any points, questions that they'd like to make, put to the panel?
I'd like to know if any other language is increasing. Do you see what I mean?
Spanish, probably.
Is that
the population of the world?
Yes. Would there ever be a time when English
Chinese
wouldn't be the most spoken language in the world?
Well, I think there's a few different ways to look at the question, because the use of English is very widespread in terms of a basic workforce skill. So you see it's prevalent everywhere, and it's also prominent in media, it's prominent in research, science, innovation, and so forth. So, and it's not mutually exclusive to promote the value of English and to promote furthering your knowledge of your own language or learning other languages. English has become a tool, and it's part of a good tool set to have for your career. But for the rise of other languages, when we've researched organizations, companies, governments, and so forth, where they invest their language training or what they see coming ahead, English by far dominates what's on their training agenda for the workforce. But you do see a rise in major regional languages. If you think of it as territories of the world, in Latin America, Spanish, of course, is still very prominent for use across the region. And we also see Mandarin is increasing somewhat, but not as much as you would think. It's a pretty high barrier to entry for learning Mandarin. And if you think from a language learning perspective, it takes about 800 to 900 hours to get anywhere close to working proficiency or even university entrance level. So for those of us who already have English as a language we use and speak every day, we don't think about it in those terms. But if you needed to go to work tomorrow in Tokyo, you're looking at a good 800 or 900 hours of investment to get to working proficiency. So a lot of people in the world have a low-grade knowledge of English already, and what we're trying to do is lift that up, and so that people can work more effectively. But languages such as Mandarin, such as Spanish, figure more into the single digits in terms of the percentage that they would have of a training budget, for example.
Yes, I'd just like to make a comment pick up on something Lucy said about language learning. I think you said, if I remember correctly, it was seen as a measure of being truly academic to be able to do a modern foreign language to GCSE level. And I think it's rather sad that it is seen as that, rather than as a measure of us as a civil society and broadening our cultural awareness. I think that the UK is becoming a little isolated in that respect. And the emphasis and the reason for learning a language seems to have got lost somewhere. Like you, Iain, I grew up learning German and French at school, and I learnt other languages as I went along, and I've been a lifelong learner of languages. And for me, that opens doors. It helps me understand other people of other nations better. And I think that's the emphasis we should be putting on language learning, is to not become too isolated. That doesn't mean that, as Chris said, that English is a tool and we want to increase the capacity of countries around the world to use it as the tool that they see fit. And indeed they do. The capacity building projects that are going on in some countries around the world are staggering. There's a project in Panama, for example, called Panama Bilingue, where the president of Panama decided a few years ago that in 10 years every single person in Panama had to be bilingual in English. And so they are flying teachers over here in their hundreds to learn English and to be able to teach the curriculum eventually in English. And you see other examples of that in places like Kazakhstan and Colombia, for example, and other South American and Latin American countries. And the UK is involved in that. And I talked about transnational education. And there is some government support. The Department of International Trade is very keen to help UK providers. I think Chris referred to the UK as the source of quality, the source of standards, and there is a desire to export that to other countries in the world. But sadly, we have had very little policy attention. And English language teaching, that business has got swallowed up to some extent in the rhetoric about immigration and students as migrants. Most of my students don't count in the net migration figures because they're not on those types of visas, if indeed they are on visas. But the knock-on effect of that has been to create a fairly unwelcoming perception of the UK. And people make decisions based on perception, not on fact sometimes. And so we do need a much more welcoming policy. Yes, exactly. We do need a much more welcoming policy which recognises this industry, whether it's here, which is of course my emphasis, or being able to export that quality abroad to protect it and to grow it, as I said.
Why would Panama send its teachers here rather than to the United States?
A very good question. They did send a few to the United States,
right.
and they didn't have a particularly good experience, so they started sending more to the UK. They were sending them to Arizona, I believe. I don't know why.
I think that sort of speaks to one of those points about, in a way, the ubiquity of American pop culture is one of the reasons the English language is so around the world, but it's sort of an advantage that we've not necessarily created, but that we can take advantage of, and that we're not doing nearly enough to. But I think to take up Sarah's point, I think in some ways one of the problems for modern language learning in our own country is that there is this kind of presumption that everyone else is learning English, and therefore why would you bother learning that? And then it becomes a kind of reductive thing about employment rather than being about cultural openness. But as I say, I think one of the interesting factors at the moment is that we simply can't get enough Spanish, French and German teachers in this country now. So we're already not making the regime for that kind of intercultural learning work for us now, at a point where we have theoretically unlimited access to speakers of that language. So what we need to do is think quite carefully about, it's clearly not a function of EU membership that it's working or not. What is it that would actually make that work?
So what you're saying is, when LBC fire me, I can go back to my original career, which was going to be a German teacher.
Yeah, that's it.
Light the spark somewhere.
Now you've said that, there will be schools that will come and hunt you down.
Not many schools offer German these days.
No,
that's right.
It's a dying.
But I think in today's
you have to have
context,
French as well, otherwise you won't get on the
see,
timetable.
I was terrible at French.
Yeah, you need French as well to be
well.
a teacher these
Good
days.
idea at the time.
Maybe the private schools, maybe.
I was just going to say, I think that as linguists, we have a duty to really communicate the benefits of learning a language, and we should be encouraged by the research that is being done around bilingualism and those benefits for children and adults alike. And it may not be the case ever that a particular student will travel to that country, will study abroad, because that is a privileged experience for many people. However, learning a language can change the way you see the world and the way you see yourself, and we should be communicating that. It's especially now, as the UK seeks to enrich its relationships around the world beyond the European Union, we need to really think about what are key languages, what are things that we can do to encourage people to see their position in the world in a new light, perhaps.
Anybody else?
Can I ask a question about the role of institutions like the British Council? Lots of other countries have their equivalent. The French are tremendously good at that kind of soft power and cultural diplomacy, but the Chinese are doing a lot more of this as well. We're not investing enough in the British Council, a number of reports have been saying, so I'd be interested in the panel's thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I think the British Council, BBC World Service, I think as well, was under threat a couple of years ago. These are very important and powerful sort of tools in that sort of soft cultural exporting of our values and our language and so on. So I think that's key. But I think there are, as you were saying earlier, I think sport, some of our sort of TV and films as well. Whenever I go around the world, obviously because I'm from Manchester, the first conversation is always football. I have to tell them that I'm a City fan, not a United fan to start off with. But
Glory hunter.
I preferred us when we were in the lower divisions, to be honest. But anyway, that's another story. But I think bringing some of this together more clearly in a strategy. I think that's what I was saying in my opening remarks is that there might be pockets of the international trade department or small pockets of the education department who've got some responsibility for this, but having a much stronger and clearer strategy about how we are going to project ourselves to the world and make the best of what we've got, both in terms of our language, our culture, our sport, and all of those things. But bringing that together, I think, would be much more powerful than these sort of slightly separate conversations and seeing them in the round.
Yes, I mean, I totally support what Lucy's just said. The British Council is a marvellous organisation for promoting soft power all over the world, and it does a fantastic job. We work very closely with the British Council. I mean, they accredit our schools here, and we work with them on promoting the UK as a language learning destination or a study destination, and it's very sad that the funding has been cut. What Lucy was saying about the sort of more joined up approach, countries like Australia have seen their international education boom because they have had a government policy to promote and a strategic plan for promoting international education. They have something called an International Education Council, where different government departments work together with the sector to build and grow the industry. We don't have that. We should.
One note about the British Council. Despite the challenging circumstances they operate in, we do see them everywhere, and they can be quite effective. EF operates in over 100 countries around the world, and so we do quite often collaborate with British Council. And I've just spent the last few years living in Beijing, in China, and I've just moved back to the UK this summer. And the work they've done in China is incredible to raise awareness among young people. They've really focused on youth and helping people understand what the UK is all about. Innovation, creativity, and a fabulous place to get an education. And China is one of the few countries, as a sending country to the UK, that is actually growing. Only Saudi Arabia and China at the moment are seeing that upward trend. The rest of the countries have been declining. So we can see a positive impact. There is more awareness about the UK in China, which is obviously going to be a fantastic partner for collaboration for many years to come. So it's great to see what they are able to do, but I think that more awareness and more strategic focus on how they can attract people to the UK will be even more important into the future.
And just to say, I think another area in which our soft power, I think, has been routinely demonstrated is in from the university sector, and generally the universities hosting international students. But I think I'm aware that in the past few weeks the university sector has taken a repeated and heavy hammering from a wide variety of policy people about lots of things that it does. But I do think an area that probably needs a little bit of investigation is the way in which some universities do treat their international students. They are an enormous source of soft power to us, but there are also, I think, indications that in some places they're getting a pretty raw deal for the money they're turning over, for the qualifications they're getting. And I think we need to make sure that the universities are taking that seriously and are playing their part effectively and well.
It is interesting, though, particularly with Chinese students. You may be amazed to learn that I'm now a visiting professor of politics and broadcasting at UEA, my old university. And if you look at the broadcast journalism course there's about 30 students on it, and more than half of them are from China. And that course would not exist without those students. So if they feel there's any impediment to them coming, I mean, there'll be a knock-on effect on British students as well with some courses like that.
I think the Institute director did a report a year or so ago about the STEM courses in this country. And I think there are about 80% of the students were international, and it would make a number of courses completely unviable.
Anybody else?
Just one point to make on that is that we have to remember, in the context of this conversation, English language training is the entryway into those university courses. It's the way that we attract people into further education and higher education in the United Kingdom, and professional development training beyond. So we have a fundamental role to play in introducing the UK and its language to people from a very young age, and the kinds of experiences we can have on a 2-week course, as you mentioned, can translate into a lifetime of education and career opportunities with the United Kingdom.
And that's the opportunity.
On the migration point, I wondered if you'd given any thought to trying to expand the youth mobility scheme, what used to be the Commonwealth Youth Visa. It now only has 8 countries in it, but even if we had a completely hard Brexit, every European country would be immediately eligible to join it. That could bring in a load of under-30s for 2 years. They just need to apply. But it's getting the government to actually put in the application.
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Yeah, well, I think anything, as we've heard, I mean, obviously it's kind of ludicrous that students are included in the net migration targets, I think, given that, given the contribution that they make and the fact that they're paying to be here and, limited kind of level of their visas anyway. So I think anything that makes it easier for young people to come and study and work for a sort of short but not insignificant sort of period in time in the UK after Brexit, will only be a good thing for the country. And I don't think, when I think about all the conversations I had with people around, my own constituents and others around the sort of Brexit debate, I don't think it was that kind of immigration that people had an issue with.
Is this an issue that the Education Select Committee might want to look into?
Yeah, we've got a few inquiries coming up, but one of them is higher education, so might touch on that. But I think beyond that, I mean, obviously we only just first met and agreed the next sort of 2 or 3 inquiries, but it's certainly something that I'll talk to the chair about, because I think as I say, I think it's a really under scrutinised and under discussed issue that's absolutely critical, and we've got it's a great opportunity.
So something positive has come out of this meeting.
Yes,
Excellent.
definitely.
That's what we like. Final question from anybody. In that case, I will thank our panel very much for coming today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And thanks to Policy.